our class in Mishna Berurah. Glad we could all join this morning. I, of course, only have a brief amount of time because it's Erev Yom Tov, but we will still learn. We are in Orach Chaim 145. We are in Siman Kuf Mem Hey, and we are in Dinei HaMetargemin, the rules relating to the person who does the translating of the Torah. So what does that mean? Well, the Shulchan Aruch will explain it to us immediately. So he says in the first halakha over here, in the days of the wise men of the Gemara, the custom was to translate in order that the entire population gathering there could understand. So the person reading did not have permission to continue reading more than one verse at a time to allow the translator to translate it. And the person translating didn't have permission to translate more anything until the pasuk was finished by the reader. And the reader did not have permission to read more than one verse at a time until the translator finished his time necessary to translate the verses. And the person reading was not allowed to lift his voice greater than the person translating, and the translator could not raise his voice greater than the person reading. And the person reading didn't have permission to help the translator, so that way people shouldn't think that the Targum, the translation, was written in the Torah. So that was what they did, all right? So it's really funny how they write it in those responsibilities that way. So the Mishnah Berurah explains they used to translate it. What language? Well, the language of Targum, of course, the translator language. Which language is that? That is Aramaic. So that was what they did. And they would listen to the Turgam, okay? And all this, the Mishnah Berurah explains, was in order to not confuse the congregation. And then they could hear the entire parsha just as it was written in the Torah. And afterwards, they could understand its explanation via the translator. And he couldn't lift his voice louder, as it says, Moshe Yidaber Vaha Elokim Ya'anenu B'Kol, because we see that by Har Sinai that Moshe spoke and God responded to him, and this voice was the same voice level as that of Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's what they used to do. So just kind of summarize that up again. The Torah reader is not permitted to read for the translator more than one verse, and the translator only translates one verse. They have to wait for each other to finish, and they have to be about the same sound. Okay? The next halach over here is a young person may translate by an adult, meaning the adult is reading, but it's not honorable or respectful for the older person for the adult to have his reading translated by a child. Okay, so your question might be, well, when would those cases apply one to the other? So the Mishra actually makes zero comment on this. Okay, so the Kaf HaChaim over here explains what this means. So it's not that they are larger and smaller people. It refers to actually the how great they are in accomplishments. Okay. So this halacha comes from the Ran, and it comes from the Gemara. Okay, so we say that the lesser person reads and the greater person translates, and that comes from Aharon. And Aharon, we said Aharon will be your prophet, and you will be like God to him. And so the translation of that is Aharon will be your Meturgaman, is what the Targum Onkelos says. And this is brought down here in a few other commentaries, including the Kaf HaChaim. Okay, so that's what we're talking about over here. Okay, and in fact, most people over here say that the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah also say that the honor due to this is to actually not appoint a person to be a Maturgaman under age 50. So he brings all of that. So that's the conversation that the Kaf HaChaim brings up. So there's not a lot of Mishnah Berurah in there, but there is Kaf HaChaim. Okay. Nowadays, the Shulchan Aruch explains, our custom is to not translate it into Aramaic, Because what is the value? Because people don't understand Aramaic either. Okay, so the Mishna asks the um, the obvious question. He asks the question of, okay, well, why don't I say it in a language that is one that I understand? Okay, well, he says because Targum is different because the Targum was initiated by prophetic inspiration, Ruach HaKodesh. Okay, and now also there are people who disagree with this opinion, and they say that you actually could translate it into the local language, just that people haven't done it. Okay, so that's what we're saying. So that's some people argue with that. So some people say you could, some people say you can't. Okay, so that's what Mr. Berurah brings down. Does anybody do the translation nowadays? So so the funny thing is the Bach asks a question over here. He says the Torah points out that it's nice that we don't translate it anymore. So then why did you teach us all these halachas? So basically, some people were still doing it even in the days of the tour, and he says, but in many places where I go to, they don't do it anymore. And so he points out that there are some places where they translate the Haftarah of the 8th day of Pesach and the Haftarah of Tisha B'Av. And so there are places where they still were using the Targum, so the Torah still writes about that. Okay, so that's what the Bach writes about this. So again, why don't more people do that? So the Lavush is the one that's quoted over here as saying that because Targum is special because it was initiated by Ruach HaKodesh. So then, so Mishna said quotes this Tashbetz. He says, no, we do have permission to go ahead and translate it now. And so some other people will say that that if it's not considered, it's the language itself that's not considered a good language to speak it in. So therefore, even though you can learn in that language, then you should go ahead and use it. Some people treat Yiddish that way, but obviously Yiddish is a lower level than Aramaic. So that's what we say. All right, so that is 145. Let's do 146. So 146 are not to speak while the Torah is being read. So the Shulchan Aruch begins that it is prohibited to exit and to leave the Sefer Torah while it lies open on the teva, as he calls it, or the bima as we call it. But between people, when you tend to close it, that's okay. So the Mishna explains the reason why is because they quote the pasuk from the Gemara, Ozvei Hashem yichalu, the people who ditch God will be destroyed. And the translation, Aramaic, is that the one who leaves the Torah while it is open, so that's that those are the people who do it. So even if there's 10 people there who are going to listen to the reading of it, and he himself has already heard Kriyas Torah, nonetheless, he still can't leave. It's disrespectful. But between the people reading, it's okay. And that's as long as 10 people are left in the shul. And the thing is that if you already heard Kriyas Torah, okay, or you're going to come back immediately, you have to wait. You have to only do this when it's a great need. Halacha Beis over here. So when the person reading has started to read from the Sefer Torah, you are not permitted to speak even Divrei Torah, and even between the different people, and even when you finish the Parsha, and some people allow you to read, okay, meaning to learn something quietly, and some people say that you could say those words to yourself quietly. And some people say that if there are 10 people who are listening, meaning they are focusing on the reading, then the Sefer Torah, while it's still open, then you could go ahead and speak to somebody else, but only in Divrei Torah. So the Ramah adds that. And some people permit also that someone who is a full-time Torah person, that they do nothing but learn Torah, that's permitted for them to speak during the reading. And there's also permission for those who, before the Sefer Torah has been opened, turns his face away and shows himself as someone who doesn't want to listen to the Sefer Torah. and he only wants to read something different, and he starts to recite that thing. Okay, and then we say finally over here, and to recite Shnai Mikra Echad Targum, there's a requirement for everyone to repeat the weekly parsha twice, and then the Aramaic translation once. During the time of reading the Torah is permitted. Okay, however, this is not included in the recitation of Parshas Zachor and Parshas Para. Okay, those are part of the four parshios that lead up to Pesach, because those have a requirement from the Torah to have 10 people present for their reading. And so therefore one must stop, focus, and listen to them, to hear them for the person reading. And the truth is that the appropriate thing to do is every single one of the parshios, it's important to pay as close attention to his words as possible in order that you can hear it and understand what the person reading is saying. Okay? There's a lot going on over there. So let's talk about what we're talking about. So we said, first of all, that this prohibition of talking starts from the moment you open the Torah. Mishna says the Magen Avraham seems to incline that as soon as the Torah is opened, you have to stop, and even if they haven't started reading yet. Okay, so like they're looking for the spot. Can't speak. The Gra seems to say that as well. As soon as they open the Sefer Torah, you can't speak. Okay, and what he says even on Divrei Torah, and that's also how you should. That's also to explain what the Dvar Torah was, or to give somebody an answer in Psak Halacha. Okay, are prohibited, and all this, or if, however, to save somebody from doing something wrong, you're permitted to tell them a quick thing like, "Don't do that." Okay, especially if you can't tell them not to do it, right? So that's okay. So then you could set them to not do it. And even between people, we say not to speak. Why? Because maybe the learning will drag on and you'll not hear the learning. However, the Bach is lenient by learning in between people. And the Aliyah Rabbah seems to say that there's no reason to be lenient for this. Okay? Because people, that if you're learning with other people, that might be a problem. Okay? Now, he doesn't say those words, but he's implying, the Mishnah explains, that by yourself, if you're just talking to yourself, he will allow you to do some learning. And then you shouldn't tell that person to stop learning. So if you see somebody who's learning in the middle of Kriya, you don't have to go over him and tell him to stop learning, because that seems to be okay. But to go ahead and give a psak, someone's like, I don't know if my plate's kosher, I don't know if my pot's kosher, shouldn't do that. Because on sometimes, there could be a great need. If it's like early urgent, then you shouldn't be so strict, because most times it won't be really urgent. Let's say they want to set up for Kiddush, and they're like, can I put this in the oven now? Can I not do that? Fine. We say that would be a case. Now, we say if you've already finished the parsha, okay, you still shouldn't talk. So the reason why is because Shnai Mikav Echad Tarkum. Okay, so that's what it's saying. So it sounds like you finished the parsha. It doesn't mean you finished the parsha while that they were reading, but you finished Shnai Mikav Echad Targum. Okay, so the Prima Gunam explains that even if you have heard the whole reading before, publicly, you still can't talk, and that's what the Berurah seems to say as well. So it's a little bit of dispute about that. So we say you still shouldn't talk. Now, some people are leaning about talking when there are 10 people standing and listening to the laning, okay, except with the exception of you being there. And even there, it's only to permit that as long as you're not speaking something out loud, okay, so that way you don't interrupt the people who are trying to listen. Reminds me of people who come to shul just to talk. They're talking to increase the Torah. You can shush them. You shouldn't talk to them. Say, listen, you're not supposed to talk. Now, there's also permission for people who learn all day to go ahead and continue their learning during the reading. So it says even where there are 10 people who are listening, it's still only permitted for them to learn at the time of the recitation of the Torah Parsha, when they are someone who are learning at all times, because they don't take a break to do anything else other than learn. And the Aliyah Rabbah, the Mishna brings on the Aliyah Rabbah, who says that in the number of Rishonim that we don't have a Torah Sumanus like they did back in the days of the Gemara. So therefore, there's no permission for this. Okay. Now we said the next opinion we bring down is that if you are someone who has turned their face away. Okay? So the reason why this opinion works, Mishna explains, is because they hold that since you are showing, this is they've started doing the mitzvah, and you show other people in the shul that you are not participating in it, you are setting yourself off for doing learning Torah of other topics, and therefore you're not obligated to stop for the reading of the Torah. But if you haven't started learning some other topic, then nobody should ever turn their face away from the Torah reading, even if someone has learning Torah at all times. Okay, we said that was permitted, and that's even because that's according to everybody we mentioned here, because this is similar to what the Shliach Tzibur himself is reading. Okay, so that the I'm sorry, when you're reading Korea, so when you're reading the parsha that the Kori is reading, and you're doing Shnai Mikra, that's permitted because everyone says it's okay because you're following along what the person is reading. That's why it's permitted, even though you're not really reading yourself. The exact pasuk that the Shliach Tzibur is reading, you should try to do that. Okay, you should only do that when you're trying to focus on what everybody else is reading. Okay, and we say this is only permitted, when it's not Parshas Zachor and Parshas Para, okay? Because the Berurah explains Parshas Para because it's the Arais is what it sounds like. So the Mishnah brings up the Gra and the Pri Chadash and other Acharonim write down that this isn't really true at Parshas Para. It's really a rabbinic requirement, but they still feel that you should pay attention to it. And the really truth is that by all parshios, he says that you should follow this. Okay, even to go ahead and keep reciting the Shai Rekavach Targum, right? Reading it twice and all that. You should only do that. You shouldn't really do that while they're doing the laning, but you should hear from the reader word for word. Now, if you read word for word with the reader and you read it yourself, that would be okay. That would be fine to do Shai Mikra. What we're saying is to not be in cadence with them. At the end over here, we say that you should really try to listen to the reader altogether. Now, the Pri Chadash is brought down here in the Mishnah Berurah, and he says that the main rule is that you can't focus on anything else, even Shmona, even Shnai Mikra Echad Targum, while the person is laning, and even there's 10 people listening. Okay, and the Magen Avraham quotes the Shlah, who's strict about this as well. You have to be quiet and listen to the reading from the reader. Okay, and the Gra says that as well. Nonetheless, reading Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, okay, or with Perish Rashi, being between people is permitted, even according to this opinion. And the Magen Avraham quotes another opinion from the Matan Moshe that it's fine to read word for word with the shots, because without this, you're not going to be able to focus on it. So you can kind of do Shnai Mikra by doing that. Okay, that's halacha Aleph, halacha Beis over here. One is not allowed to speak while the maftir is being read, and especially when the maftir is being read from the Haftarah prophets, until that's finished. Just like with the Sefer Torah, and the Mishnah Berurah explains that you also have to pay attention for the reading of the maftir's bracha, and answer amen afterwards. Halacha Gimel. One does not need to be standing during the reading of the Torah. And the Ramah adds, there are those who are strict and stand, and that's what the Maharam did. Okay, so what is this talking about? The Mishna explains that even though the people who are standing on the bima, they don't really need to stand, except for the Sefer Torah being there, just like a person who is carrying a Sefer Torah. But if it's laid down on the table properly, you don't have to stand. Okay? And the only people who actually need to stand are the person doing the bracha and the person doing the reading. And so too, when someone is holding onto his hand, okay, just like if you're reading on to, or they're holding the Sefer Torah in their hand, like they're reading from the Haftarah, if he's sitting in one spot, he doesn't have to actually stand for that, okay? And even if it's within Arba Amos of the bima, okay? Now, if you're carrying around the Sefer Torah, you obviously have to stand, and when it passes in front of you, you have to stand in front of it until it gets either far enough away from you can't see it anymore, or until it gets to the Aron itself. And you're not even allowed to lean on stuff. Okay, so the reading itself is done. You may sit down, and when you recite Baruch Hu and the blessings, some people say that it's davar shebekdusha, and you need to stand. So Mr. Berurah brings that down. So he says that. Um, that Mr. Berurah says that, just so you know, it's not, that's not according to everybody. So let's see. There are people who say that. That's the people who say that the Masas Benyamin. The Knesset Hagadola and the Hagos Bev Yosef seem to disagree with that. Okay. No, I'm sorry. It's the Shira Knesset Hagadola that this is not the custom, and there are people who also write that this isn't the custom. That this is not, was also not the custom of the RE and in other places. So the Mishra brings down that's the custom, but it's brought down from other Achronim that it's not the case. I'm surprised the Mishra Berurah isn't more elaborate about that. So some people are strict and they stand for the entire reading. So the Pri Chadash and the Gra write that you can sit, and that's the custom. And the Bach said earlier, but we bring it here, that the Maharam agrees that really you're allowed to sit, but he himself felt to be strict on himself. Okay? So that when you hear the reading from the reader, it's like you're receiving the Torah anew. Okay? Everyone was standing at Har Sinai. And so we see clearly that's what they did. So therefore, a person who is not feeling well or it's difficult to stand, of course they can sit. And, if a person focuses better when they're sitting, that's also good too. And the Maharam, by the way, the Mishna explains, he would stand the whole time, except for in between people. So when they finished reading the bracha, he would sit. Alrighty. So we cleared up 146, 145, 146 today. Thank you for joining. Everyone have a Zis and Pesach, and we will see you next time.